The Chamber of Echoes stretched across 3 kilometers of living crystal, and within its ancient walls, 4,000 species had gathered to argue about the fate of a single world they had never visited. Ambassador Thylindra of the Kelvori stood near the center platform, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with soft blue light as she watched the young Draxan delegation march forward with the confidence of conquerors who had never tasted defeat. And she felt something she had not experienced in centuries: fear. The Draxan were impressive creatures, standing nearly 3 meters tall, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that burned like molten copper. And their leader, Warlord Keleth, wore the ceremonial armor of his ancestors, decorated with the symbols of 200 conquered worlds. "We demand expansion rights into the Sol system," Keleth announced, his voice echoing through the chamber like thunder across mountains. "Our empire grows, and we require new territory for our people." A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates, and Thylindra noticed how many of them looked away, pretending they had not heard, hoping someone else would speak first. She closed her 4 eyes and remembered a time long ago, when her people had been young and foolish, when they had traveled to a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, and what they had found there had changed everything. "The Sol system is restricted under Elder Protocol 7, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 9,000 years. "This matter is not open for discussion." Keleth laughed, and it was the laugh of someone who had never been told no, the laugh of a predator who saw only prey before him. "Protocol 7, he repeated with contempt dripping from every syllable. "A rule created by species too old and too weak to remember what power means. And we are not bound by the fears of ancient cowards." The chamber fell silent, and Thylindra felt the attention of thousands of eyes upon her as she slowly rose from her seat and walked toward the central platform where the Draxan stood. "You wish to know why Sol is forbidden," she said, and her skin dimmed to a sorrowful purple. "Then I will tell you what my ancestors witnessed 10,000 years ago, and perhaps you will understand why we created a law that has never been broken." She raised her hand, and the holographic projectors in the chamber activated, filling the air with images of a planet covered in blue oceans and green continents. A world so beautiful it made several delegates gasp with wonder. "This is Earth," Thylindra explained, "the 3rd planet of the Sol system, home to a species called humanity. And when we first found them, they were primitive creatures barely capable of working bronze into tools and weapons." The images shifted to show ancient humans, small and fragile compared to most galactic species, fighting each other with swords and spears while building great monuments of stone that reached toward the sky. "We studied them for decades," Thylindra continued. "We watched them wage wars over land and resources, killing each other with passionate fury that shocked our observers. And yet we also watched them create art of breathtaking beauty, compose music that moved our scientists to tears, and build temples dedicated to peace and love." Keleth snorted with disdain and crossed his massive arms across his chest. "They sound like animals," he said, "violent and primitive, exactly the kind of species the hegemony was born to rule." "That is what we thought," Thylindra admitted. "So we ran predictive simulations, using the most advanced computers our civilization possessed, trying to determine what humanity would become if left to develop naturally. And the results terrified us so deeply that our entire species changed course." She waved her hand, and new images appeared, graphs and charts and probability, matrices that stretched across the chamber like a web of glowing light. "Every simulation showed the same pattern," she said. "Humanity possessed something we had never seen in any other species, a quality we still do not fully understand, a refusal to accept defeat that defied all logic and reason." The delegates leaned forward, their curiosity overcoming their caution. Other species, when faced with overwhelming odds, We'll surrender or flee or find compromise, Falindra explained. This is rational behavior, the behavior of creatures who wish to survive. But humans are different, and when pushed to the edge of extinction, they do not break, they transform. She showed them footage from human history, cities burning, armies falling, civilizations collapsing, and then showed them what came after, the rebuilding, the adaptation, the relentless march forward no matter how many times they were knocked down. Our simulations predicted two possible futures, she said. In one, humanity matures slowly, learns wisdom alongside strength, and becomes the greatest force for good the galaxy has ever seen. Protectors of the weak, champions of justice, builders of an age of peace that lasts 1,000,000 years. And the other future? Asked a delegate from the consortium of flowing stars. Thalindra's skin went dark, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. In the other future, humanity is provoked before they are ready, pushed into war before they have learned restraint, and they become something terrible beyond imagination, a species that burns across the galaxy like wildfire, consuming everything in their path until nothing remains but ash and silence. The chamber was utterly still, and even Keleth seemed momentarily uncertain. We created Protocol 7 to prevent this catastrophe, Talindra said. We declared the Sol system off-limits to all contact, all interference, all provocation, and for 10,000 years. Every species in this Concord has honored that rule because they understood what was at stake. She turned to face Keleth directly, and her eyes burned with desperate intensity. The humans have developed faster than we predicted, she warned. They have already reached their neighboring planets, already built primitive ships capable of traveling between stars, and they stand now at the threshold of becoming a galactic species. Balance between the two futures our simulations foresaw. You are asking me to be afraid of primitives who have barely left their own world, Keleth said. And his voice was full of mockery. The hegemony has conquered species far more advanced than these humans. And we will add Earth to our empire, whether this Concord approves or not. Then you are a fool, Thalindra said, and your foolishness will doom us all. Keleth stepped forward until he towered over the ancient Kelvori, and his eyes blazed with anger. The Draxan hegemony formally declares its intention to subjugate the Sol system. He announced to the chamber, any species that interferes will be considered an enemy of our empire. He turned and marched toward the exit, his delegation following behind him, and Thalindra watched them go with sorrow weighing heavy on her hearts. A delegate from the merchant guilds approached her nervously. Surely the humans cannot be as dangerous as you claim, he said. They are one species on one world, and the Draxan have 400 warships in their third fleet alone. Thalindra looked at him with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a shore. You do not understand, she said. The Draxan believe they are going to conquer humanity, but they are wrong. And what they are actually doing is waking a sleeping giant, poking a beast that should have been left alone for another 1,000 years. She began walking toward her own delegation, her steps slow and heavy with the burden of prophecy. When this war ends, she said over her shoulder, and it will end badly for everyone, remember that I warned you. Remember that the elders begged the Draxan to turn back. And remember that what comes next is not our fault. The Merchant Guild delegate watched her go, and for the first time in his long career, he felt truly afraid of something he had never seen. Somewhere across the vast darkness of space, 8 billion humans lived their lives, unaware that a fleet of conquerors was coming, unaware that their entire existence was about to change forever. And in the quiet chambers of the Calvary Embassy, Ambassador Thalindra composed a message to her homeworld. A message that contained only 5 words. The warning was not heeded. The Draxan Third Fleet emerged from hyperspace near the orbit of Neptune. 400 warships bristling with weapons that could crack planets open like eggs. And Warlord Keleth stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the distant blue dot of Earth with hungry eyes. "Begin the broadcast," he ordered, and his communications officer activated the transmission array that would send humanity its first and only warning. "Attention, creatures of Earth," Keleth spoke into the recorder, his voice dripping with contempt. "I am Warlord Keleth of the Draxan hegemony, and your world now belongs to us. So you will surrender all military assets, kneel before our authority, and accept your place as servants of the Empire. And you have one rotation of your planet to comply or face complete annihilation." The message shot across the void at the speed of light, and 4 hours later, it reached the ears of every human being alive. In Geneva, the Human Defense Council convened an emergency session, and representatives from every nation crowded into a room that had never felt smaller. General Yuki Tanaka stood before the assembled leaders, her face calm despite the terror gripping her heart, as she delivered her assessment in a voice that did not waver. "The alien fleet consists of approximately 400 vessels," she reported. "Each one is larger and more heavily armed than anything we possess, and based on our analysis, they outgun our entire planetary defense grid by a factor of 50 to 1. Panic erupted in the chamber, with some delegates screaming for immediate surrender, while others demanded impossible miracles from their military commanders. "We cannot win this fight," admitted the Secretary General, his face pale with despair. "Perhaps if we negotiate, we can preserve some measure of autonomy." "You want to surrender our world to creatures who call us vermin?" demanded Admiral James Okonkwo, rising from his seat with fury burning in his eyes. "You want to tell 8 billion people that their lives, their dreams, their children's futures now belong to alien masters? What choice do we have?" asked the Secretary General. Admiral Okonkwo looked around the room at the frightened faces of humanity's leaders, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of every human who had ever fought against impossible odds. "They came to our home," he said. "They threatened our families. They called us vermin, and they expect us to kneel. But I say we give them a different answer. I say we show them what happens when you back humanity into a corner." "We will lose," General Tanaka said quietly. "The mathematics are clear." "Then we lose fighting," Okonkwo replied. "We make them pay for every kilometer they advance. We make them bleed for every world they take. And we show this galaxy that humanity does not surrender. Not now, not ever." The vote was close, but in the end, humanity chose defiance. Within hours, every military asset on Earth and throughout the solar system was mobilized, and volunteers flooded recruitment centers in numbers that overwhelmed the system. A retired miner named Viktor Petrov, 67 years old, with hands scarred from decades of work, walked into a recruitment office and demanded a ship. "You are too old," the young officer told him. "This is a mission for soldiers." "My grandson lives on the moon colony," Victor replied. "If you think I am going to sit here while aliens threaten his home, you do not know what kind of man I am. So give me a ship or I will steal one." He was not alone. Millions of ordinary people demanded the right to fight, and the military could not turn them all away. The human fleet that assembled was small and primitive compared to the Draxan Armada, consisting of orbital defense platforms, hastily armed cargo ships, and 12,000 single-pilot fighters that the crews had nicknamed coffin ships because everyone knew the odds of survival. General Tanaka addressed the fleet before they launched. "The enemy expects us to be afraid," she said. "They expect us to run or hide or beg for mercy. But we are going to teach them something they have never learned in all their centuries of conquest. Something that will make them regret ever coming to our system." "What is that, General?" asked a young pilot named Elena Vasquez, barely 19 years old, with photographs of her family taped to her cockpit. "We are going to teach them that humans do not care about odds," Tanaka replied. "We do not care about logic, and we do not care about survival when the people we love are threatened. Because we fight with something no weapon can match. We fight with love and rage and the absolute refusal to accept defeat." The fleet launched, streaming toward Neptune like a swarm of angry fireflies racing toward a forest fire. Warlord Caliph watched them come with amusement curling his lips. "They actually think they can fight us," he said to his officers. "How entertaining, how utterly pathetic, and this will be over within the hour." But the hour came and went, and the battle continued. The humans fought like nothing the Draxan had ever seen, employing tactics that made no logical sense, sacrificing ships to create openings that barely mattered, refusing to retreat even when their formations collapsed. A pilot named Chen Wei, his ship crippled and burning, aimed his vessel directly at a Draxan cruiser and accelerated to maximum speed while transmitting one final message to his comrades: "Remember me and make them pay." His ship punched through the cruiser's hangar bay and detonated its nuclear payload inside, destroying the vessel from within. Viktor Petrov, the old miner who had demanded a ship, piloted his weaponized cargo freighter directly into the flagship's engine section, and his alarm screamed around Warlord Caliph. The old man's voice crackled over the communication channel. "This is for my grandson, you monsters." The explosion tore through 3 decks and killed Caliph instantly. When the battle finally ended, the humans had lost, and the survivors retreated toward Mars to regroup, but something impossible had happened. 89 Draxan ships drifted as burning wreckage among the ice and rock of the outer system, more vessels than the hegemony had lost in 300 years of conquest. On the Draxan command ship, now led by High Commander Varth, an analyst presented his report with trembling hands. "The humans fought without regard for their own survival," he said. "They used their ships as weapons. They targeted critical systems with suicidal precision. And they displayed tactical creativity that our models cannot predict." "They are primitive," Varth growled. "They should have been easy prey." "That is what concerns me," the analyst replied. "Look at this, Commander." He activated a display showing Earth, and Varth's copper eyes widened with disbelief. The planet was broadcasting a signal across all frequencies, a signal that reached every human in the solar system. And it was not a surrender or a plea for peace. It was a call to arms. "They are recruiting," the analyst explained. "They are building more ships, and the designs are already incorporating elements of our own technology recovered from the wreckage." "How is that possible?" Varth demanded. "It should take them decades to reverse engineer our systems." "I do not know," the analyst admitted. "But our projections suggest that within 18 months, their fleet will be twice the size it was today, and their weapons will be significantly more advanced." Varth stared at the display, and for the first time in his long military career, he felt something cold settle in his stomach. On Earth, Admiral Okonkwo stood before the global broadcast network, his uniform stained with the dust of battle, and he spoke to every human alive. "Today we lost many brave people," he said. "Today we learned that we are not alone in this universe, and that some of what lives out there wants to destroy us. But today we also learned something else, something important." He paused and looked directly into the camera. "We learned that we can hurt them," he declared. "We learned that they bleed just like we do. And we learned that they made a terrible mistake when they came to our home. Because now we are angry, now we are united, and now we are coming for them." Across the planet, 8 billion voices rose in a roar that seemed to shake the very stars. The war for humanity's survival had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. 18 months of war had transformed humanity into something the galaxy had never seen before. The Draxan had expected a quick conquest, a simple matter of crushing primitive resistance and claiming another world for their empire. But instead, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare that grew worse with every passing day. On Mars, High Commander Vorith paced the corridors of his forward base, listening to reports that made his scales itch with frustration and fear. "We lost another supply convoy last night," his logistics officer reported. "The humans ambushed them in the Valles Marineris, using weapons we have never encountered before." "Describe these weapons," Vorith demanded. "They appear to be based on our own plasma technology," the officer explained nervously, "but modified in ways our engineers say should not be possible. And the efficiency has been improved by nearly 40%. Vorith slammed his fist against the wall, cracking the metal plating. 6 months ago, humans had been fighting with nuclear missiles and kinetic projectiles, primitive weapons that could barely scratch Draxon shields. But now they wielded plasma cannons that punched through armor like paper. In secret laboratories, buried beneath the mountains of Earth, teams of scientists worked around the clock to unlock the secrets of captured Draxon technology. Dr. Sarah Kim, a physicist who had not slept more than 3 hours a night since the invasion began, led the effort to reverse engineer the enemy's shield generators. "The mathematics are beautiful," she told her exhausted team. "But whoever designed this system was thinking in straight lines, and we are going to teach them what happens when humans think in curves." Within weeks, her team had not only cracked the shield harmonics, but developed a countermeasure that rendered Draxon defenses useless against the new human weapons. What should have taken decades of careful research was accomplished in months, driven by desperation, fueled by rage, and guided by the unique human ability to make intuitive leaps that no computer could predict. On Mars, the colonists who had surrendered to the Draxon occupation were proving that submission was just another form of warfare. A woman named Maria Santos, who had worked as a hydroponics technician before the invasion, now led a resistance cell that had killed more Draxon officers than any human military unit. She stood in a hidden bunker beneath the red Martian soil, briefing her team on their next mission. "The enemy thinks we are broken," she said. "They think because we surrendered, because we knelt and accepted their rule, that we have given up, but they do not understand what surrender means to humans." "What does it mean?" asked a young man who had lost his entire family in the initial assault. "It means we are waiting," Maria replied with a cold smile. "It means we are watching and learning and preparing. And when the time comes, it means we will rise up and tear them apart from the inside." That night, 3 Draxon generals died from poison slipped into their food by a server who had been planning the attack for 6 months. The next week, a power station exploded, destroying half the occupation's communications network. The week after that, a Draxon patrol vanished without a trace, their bodies found days later arranged in a pattern that spelled out a human word: freedom. General Krath, the Draxon commander in charge of the Mars occupation, sent increasingly desperate reports to High Commander Vorith. "We cannot tell civilians from combatants," he complained. "An old man who serves us drinks turns out to be a bomber. A child who begs for food is carrying reconnaissance equipment. And everyone watches us with hatred in their eyes." "Use overwhelming force," Vorith ordered. "Make examples of those who resist." "We have tried," Krath replied, "but every execution creates 10 new resistance fighters. Every destroyed settlement sends 100 more volunteers to the human military. And we are losing control of territory we thought we had secured." In orbit around Earth, the Draxon blockade continued, attempting to starve humanity into submission, but the humans refused to starve. Instead, they launched what they called Hail Mary strikes, suicide missions designed not to win battles but to steal technology and inflict casualties. Pilot Elena Vasquez, the young woman who had taped photographs of her family to her cockpit at the Battle of Neptune, flew her crippled fighter toward a Draxon carrier. Her ship had been hit by 3 plasma blasts, her engines were failing, and her life support was counting down to 0. But she did not turn back. "Control, this is Vasquez," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the blood running down her face. "I'm not going to make it home, but I'm going to make sure these bastards remember my name." She aimed for the carrier's ammunition bay, a vulnerable spot that human intelligence had identified through months of careful observation. "Tell my mom I got 3 of them," she said, and then her ship punched through the carrier's hull and detonated. The explosion triggered a chain reaction that destroyed the carrier and 2 escort vessels, and Elena Vasquez's last words became humanity's rallying cry. On Earth, her face was painted on walls and printed on posters, and pilots volunteered for Hail Mary missions in numbers that shocked even the most optimistic commanders. The Galactic Concord watched with growing horror as the war continued. Ambassador Thalinder broadcast a desperate plea to High Commander Vorth, her bioluminescent skin flickering with distress. "Withdraw your forces now," she begged. "You have woken something that should have slept for another 1,000 years, and every day you remain only makes it stronger." Vorth rejected her plea with contempt. "The hegemony has never retreated," he declared. "We will crush these vermin if it takes a century." But the humans were not waiting a century. Deep beneath Earth's surface, in factories hidden from Draxon sensors, Project Prometheus was nearing completion. Admiral Okonkwo walked through the massive construction bay, gazing up at the fleet that represented humanity's last hope and greatest achievement. 200 warships, each one built from scratch using a combination of human innovation and stolen Draxon technology. Their hulls stronger than anything the hegemony possessed. An engineer named Jackson approached the admiral with a tablet showing the final specifications. "They are ready, sir," Jackson said. "Faster, stronger, and meaner than anything the enemy has ever seen." Okonkwo nodded and ran his hand along the hull of the nearest ship, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. "What did you name them?" he asked. "The crews wanted to call them Avengers," Jackson replied, "but I suggested something different, and they agreed." He pointed to the bow of the ship, where letters had been etched into the armor in a style that looked almost ancient. The ship was called Elena Vasquez. "Every ship in the fleet is named for someone who died fighting," Jackson explained. "We figured if we are going to take this fight to the enemy, we should bring our fallen with us." Admiral Okonkwo felt tears prick at his eyes, but he did not let them fall. "Prepare for launch," he ordered. "It is time to show these invaders what happens when you challenge humanity." On Mars, Maria Santos received a coded transmission that made her smile for the first time in months. "The Phoenix is rising," the message said. "Be ready." She gathered her resistance fighters and told them to prepare for the moment they had been waiting for. "The counterattack is coming," she announced, "and when it arrives, we are going to show these aliens what happens when you occupy a human world." Across the solar system, in ships and bunkers and hidden bases, humanity prepared for the battle that would decide their fate. They had been pushed to the edge of extinction, and now they were pushing back. The furnace of war had forged them into something new, something terrifying, and the Draxon were about to learn what that meant. The Prometheus fleet emerged from behind the moon like a storm of steel and fire, 200 warships burning toward Mars with the fury of a species that had nothing left to lose. Admiral Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the flagship, a vessel named Humanity's Fury, and watched the tactical display light up with enemy contacts. "Draxon Defense Fleet is mobilizing," reported Captain Chun, a woman whose father had died ramming his ship into a Draxon cruiser at the Battle of Neptune. "They have approximately 150 vessels between us and Mars." "Then we go through them," Okonkwo replied. "Signal all ships. Operation Homecoming begins now." The battle that followed would be remembered for 1,000 years. Human ships tore into the Draxan formation with tactics that blended the suicidal courage of the early war with the advanced technology they had stolen and improved. Plasma cannons that should have been impossible for humans to build punched through Draxan shields like they were made of paper. Fighters swarmed around enemy capital ships, targeting critical systems with precision that came from months of careful intelligence gathering. And when ships were damaged beyond repair, their crews did not abandon them but instead aimed for the nearest enemy vessel and went out fighting. On Mars, Maria Santos led the resistance uprising that the Draxan had always feared. Hidden weapons caches were opened, communication systems were sabotaged, and thousands of colonists who had pretended to be broken suddenly revealed themselves as soldiers. General Krath tried to rally his occupation forces, but his orders were not reaching anyone because Maria's people had cut the communication lines 3 hours before the attack began. "This is impossible," Krath growled as explosions echoed through the Draxan command center. "They were supposed to be defeated. They were supposed to be slaves." "You never understood us," said a voice behind him, and Krath turned to find a human woman standing in the doorway with a plasma pistol aimed at his chest. It was the server who had poisoned his general 6 months ago, the one who had smiled and bowed and pretended to be afraid. "We do not break," she said. "We bend, we wait, and then we strike." Krath died with a look of disbelief frozen on his face. Above the red planet, the space battle reached its climax as Admiral Okonkwo ordered the final push. "All ships, concentrate fire on their flagship," he commanded. "If we take out their command structure, the rest will fall apart." High Commander Vorith watched the human fleet closing in, and for the first time in his career, he considered retreat. But the hegemony had never retreated, and he would not be the first to break that tradition. "All power to forward shields," he ordered. "We will crush these vermin here and now." But the humans had learned from 18 months of war, and they knew exactly where the Draxan flagship's weaknesses lay. Captain Chun led a squadron of fighters directly into the enemy's point defense grid, taking massive casualties, but creating a gap in the defensive fire. Through that gap came a single torpedo, designed by Dr. Sarah Kim's team specifically for this moment, carrying a warhead that exploited the flaw in Draxan shield harmonics that they had discovered. The torpedo struck Vorith's flagship and detonated, and the most powerful vessel in the Draxan Third Fleet tore itself apart from the inside. The battle lasted 11 hours, and when it ended, Mars was free. Human soldiers landed on the red soil, and colonists who had spent 18 months under occupation ran to greet them with tears streaming down their faces. Maria Santos stood among them, her plasma pistol still warm in her hand, and she wept for the first time since the invasion began. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." But Admiral Okonkwo was not celebrating. He stood on the bridge of humanity's fury, looking at the stars beyond Mars, and his thoughts were already turning to what came next. "Admiral," Captain Chun said, approaching him carefully, "the troops are asking what our next move is." Okonkwo turned to face her, and his eyes held a cold determination that made her shiver. "They came to our home," he said. "They killed our children, they enslaved our people, and they thought we would break, so now we go to their home. And we show them what humanity does to those who threaten our existence." 2 weeks later, the human fleet entered Draxan space. The Galactic Concord panicked when they heard the news. No species in recorded history had ever moved from first contact to interstellar offensive in less than 3 years. And yet here were the humans, doing the impossible as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. Ambassador Thalindra watched the reports with a mixture of horror and something that might have been admiration. "This was never supposed to happen," she told her assistant. "They were supposed to need another millennium to reach this point." "What changed?" her assistant asked. "The Draxan changed them," Thalindra replied. "The war did not delay human advancement. it accelerated it by a factor of 1,000. Because humans do not just adapt to challenges, they are transformed by them. The human fleet arrived at Draxon Prime, the homeworld of the hegemony, and the defenders assembled everything they had left to stop the invasion. But the humans did not attack. Instead, Admiral Okonkwo broadcast a message to the planet below, and his words shocked everyone who heard them. "People of Draxon Prime," he said, "we are not here to destroy you, and we are not here to enslave your children as you tried to enslave ours, because we are not you." He paused, and his voice softened with something that sounded almost like compassion. "Surrender your fleet, hand over your military leaders. And this war ends today," he continued. "We will not bombard your cities, we will not harm your civilians, and we will not take revenge for what you did to our world, because we are better than that." The Draxon could not understand what they were hearing. "It is a trick," insisted the new High Commander, a young officer named Vorith the Younger, who had inherited his father's position and his hatred for humanity. "They want us to lower our defenses so they can destroy us." "And if it is not a trick?" asked one of his advisors. "Then they are fools," Vorith replied, "and we will use their mercy against them." He ordered an all-out attack on the human fleet, throwing every ship the hegemony had left into one final desperate assault. The battle was swift and brutal. Human ships, now equipped with technology that exceeded anything the Draxon possessed, tore through the enemy formation with terrible efficiency. Vorith the Younger died on his bridge, killed by a human boarding party led by Sergeant David Chun, a former school teacher whose daughter had died at the Battle of Neptune. Chun stood over the dead commander's body and felt nothing but emptiness. "It is done," he reported to Admiral Okonkwo. "The Draxon command structure has been eliminated." "Any civilians harmed?" the Admiral asked. "No, sir," Chun replied. "We kept our word." On Draxon Prime, the population watched the human fleet in orbit and waited for the bombardment that never came. Instead, shuttles began landing, carrying not weapons but food, medical supplies, and construction equipment. A young Draxon girl, barely old enough to understand what was happening, approached a human soldier and asked the question that everyone wanted answered. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. "We tried to destroy you." The soldier, a woman named Rodriguez, who had lost her entire family in the war, knelt down to meet the child's eyes. "Because hurting you will not bring back the people we lost," she said, "and because we fight like demons when we have to, but we choose when to stop. That is what makes us human." The Draxon hegemony had been broken, but humanity had won something more important than victory. They had proven that they could be more than conquerors, more than warriors, more than the terrifying force the Kelvori had feared. They had proven that they could be merciful. And across the galaxy, species who had watched the war with fear began to look at humanity with something new in their eyes: hope. 1 year after the fall of the Draxon hegemony, humanity stood before the Galactic Concord as equals. The Chamber of Echoes was filled to capacity. 4,000 species gathered to witness the moment that would change the galaxy forever. And at the center of the Great Hall stood Ambassador Yuki Tanaka, formerly General Tanaka, the woman who had commanded Earth's defense during the darkest days of the war. She wore a simple uniform, unadorned except for a single medal, a small golden star that bore the names of everyone who had died at the Battle of Neptune. The chamber was silent as she approached the speaking platform, and she could feel the weight of thousands of eyes upon her, some filled with fear, others with curiosity, and a few with something that looked like hope. "We did not ask for this war," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ancient crystal walls. "We did not seek conflict with the Draxon hegemony, and we did not want to become what we became. But when enemies came to our home and threatened everything we loved, we did what humans have always done. We fought, We adapted, and we survived." A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates, and Tanaka waited for it to subside before continuing. "I know that many of you are afraid of us," she said. "I know that you have watched our war and wondered what it means for your own worlds, for your own peoples, and I want to tell you something that I hope will ease your fears." She paused and looked directly at Ambassador Thalindra, who sat among the Calvary delegation with tears glistening on her bioluminescent skin. "We are not here as conquerors," Tanaka declared. "We are not here to build an empire or to dominate the weak, because that is not who we are, and that is not who we want to become." She raised her hand, and a holographic display activated behind her, showing images of human soldiers helping to rebuild Draxan cities, sharing food with hungry families, and teaching children how to play games from Earth. "This is what humanity looks like when the war is over," she said. "This is who we choose to be when we are not fighting for our survival, and this is the promise we make to every species in this Concord." The images faded, replaced by a simple document written in 100 different languages. "We call it the Human Doctrine," Tanaka explained, "and it contains a single principle that we will defend with every ship in our fleet and every life we can spare." She read the words aloud, and her voice rang through the chamber like a bell. "No species shall be subjugated, no homeworld shall be threatened, and those who break this law will answer to Earth." The chamber erupted in chaos, with delegates shouting questions and demands and protests, but Tanaka stood calm at the center of the storm, waiting for the noise to fade. Ambassador Thalindra rose from her seat and walked slowly toward the platform, her ancient body moving with dignity despite the weight of her years. The chamber fell silent as the two representatives faced each other, the youngest spacefaring species and the oldest, separated by 10,000 years of history, but united in this moment. "Ambassador Tanaka," Thalindra said, her voice trembling with emotion. 10,000 years ago, my ancestors looked at your people and saw two possible futures. And for all that time, we have wondered which path humanity would choose." She reached out and took Tanaka's hand in her own. "Today, I have my answer," she said, "and it is better than anything I dared to hope." The chamber erupted again, but this time the noise was different. It was applause, growing louder and louder until it seemed to shake the very walls of the ancient structure. Humanity had been welcomed into the Galactic Concord. In the years that followed, the galaxy changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Human technology spread across the stars, shared freely with any species that asked, and worlds that had struggled for centuries suddenly found solutions to problems that had seemed impossible. Human doctors worked alongside alien physicians to cure diseases that had plagued civilizations for millennia. Human engineers helped build ships and stations in habitats that opened new frontiers for species who had never dreamed of leaving their homeworlds. And human soldiers stood guard at the borders of Concord space, ready to defend any world that faced the kind of threat that had once come to Earth. But not everyone was happy with the new order. Some species resented humanity's rapid rise to prominence, whispering in dark corners about the danger of letting such an aggressive species hold so much power. Others feared what humanity might become if they ever faced another existential threat, wondering if the mercy shown to the Draxan would survive a more desperate conflict. And far beyond the borders of known space, something ancient and terrible was beginning to stir. The Void Collective had consumed entire galaxies before the first life evolved on Earth. A machine intelligence of incomprehensible power that viewed organic life as nothing more than raw material to be processed and absorbed. They had been dormant for millions of years, waiting for the right moment to expand again, and the energy signatures of humanity's war had finally drawn their attention. 50 years after humanity joined the Concord, the first reports of missing colony ships began to reach the capital. At first, the disappearances were dismissed as accidents or pirate attacks, But as the numbers grew and the pattern became clear, the Concord descended into panic. Ambassador Thalindra, now ancient beyond measure, summoned an emergency session of the Chamber of Echoes. "The Void Collective has awakened," she announced, her voice heavy with despair. "Our long-range sensors have detected their advanced fleet, and it contains more vessels than all the navies in the Concord combined." The delegates screamed and wept and demanded impossible solutions, but Thalindra raised her hand for silence. "There is hope," she said. "There's always been hope, ever since a young species on a small blue world first looked up at the stars and refused to be afraid." On Earth, Admiral James Okonkwo sat in his garden, watching the emergency broadcasts on a screen while his granddaughter played nearby. He was old now, his hair white and his hands shaking, but his eyes still held the fire that had led humanity through its darkest hour. "Grandpa," his granddaughter said, climbing into his lap, "the news says something bad is coming, and everyone looks scared." Okonkwo smiled and stroked her hair. "They are scared," he admitted, "because they do not know what we know." "What do we know?" the little girl asked. "We know that every time something threatens to destroy us, we become something greater," he replied. "We know that humanity does not break when the universe pushes us. We push back, and we do not stop pushing until the fight is over." His granddaughter looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are you afraid, Grandpa?" Okonkwo laughed, and it was the laugh of a man who had stared into the void and refused to blink. "Child," he said, "they do not know what is coming, and nobody ever does." 1,000 human ships lit their engines that day, carrying volunteers from every world in the Concord, and painted on the hull of the flagship in 100 alien languages was a phrase that had become humanity's promise to the galaxy. Humanity remembers. In the Chamber of Echoes, Ambassador Thalindra watched the human fleet depart on the viewing screens, and for the first time in 10,000 years, she felt no fear for the future. The Elders had warned the galaxy to never challenge humanity, and the Draxum had learned that lesson the hard way. Now the Void Collective would learn it too, because humanity had become exactly what the Kelvori had hoped they would be. Not just warriors, not just conquerors, but protectors, champions, and the last line of defense between the darkness and the light. And the galaxy would never be the same. 1 year after the fall of the Draxan hegemony, humanity stood before the Galactic Concord as equals. The Chamber of Echoes was filled to capacity. 4,000 species gathered to witness the moment that would change the galaxy forever. And at the center of the Great Hall stood Ambassador Yuki Tanaka, formerly General Tanaka, the woman who had commanded Earth's defense during the darkest days of the war. She wore a simple uniform, unadorned except for a single medal, a small golden star that bore the names of everyone who had died at the Battle of Neptune. The chamber was silent as she approached the speaking platform, and she could feel the weight of thousands of eyes upon her, some filled with fear, others with curiosity, and a few with something that looked like hope. "We did not ask for this war," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the ancient crystal walls. "We did not seek conflict with the Draxan hegemony, and we did not want to become what we became. But when enemies came to our home and threatened everything we loved, we did what humans have always done. We fought, we adapted, and we survived." A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates, and Tanaka waited for it to subside before continuing. "I know that many of you are afraid of us," she said. "I know that you have watched our war and wondered what it means for your own worlds, for your own peoples, and I want to tell you something that I hope will ease your fears." She paused and looked directly at Ambassador Thalindra, who sat among the Kelvori delegation with tears glistening on her bioluminescent skin. "We are not here as conquerors," Tanaka declared. "We are not here to build an empire or to dominate the weak, because that is not who we are, and that is not who we want to become." She raised her hand, and a holographic display activated behind her, showing images of human soldiers helping to rebuild Draxan cities.